Hello, my name is Josh Temple. I am a game designer, and as a New Year's resolution, I decided that I was going to get more of my game design work out into the world shareable, in the hopes of getting hired to do game design somewhere. And the way I'm doing that is starting today. Every weekday, I'm going to be recording myself doing a game design prompt and slash exercise. And the way that's going to work is I'm going to give myself a timer of 45 minutes and a prompt, something that you might see in a game jam, and I'm just going to spend that 45 minutes ideating on game concepts, game mechanic concepts based on that theme, and see where it takes me. And I'll be doing this. The goal is to do this, every weekday between now and GDC in March, and then afterwards, I'm probably going to go back through some of my ideas that I had made in that couple months time, and maybe make them to a game, and maybe also record that process as well. So today, for the very first one, I might as well start the timer and get started here. So for today, the theme that I generated is borders, which instantly sort of the thing that comes to mind for me with borders, at least in the game talking. All these, there's like the literal like borders, like country borders. I'm going to have to excuse my sometimes messy handwriting and poor spelling, unfortunately. Um, so country borders, like there's so many classic, 4X, sort of games that deal a lot with borders, expanding your borders, collapsing the borders, drawing your borders. Um, the other thing that game comes to mind is like sort of like tile laying games, like Carcassonne. I should have mentioned in the beginning, I'm not necessarily only going to be thinking about video games. This might be, I might think about board games, any games of any kind in this 45-minute time period. Tiling boards. I think in terms of borders. There's also like the borders of images. So there's a lot of different ways to interpret the theme. I think in terms of as sort of like the heart of borders as like a game mechanic. I'm really thinking about like the key sort of theme being sort of division, right? Borders are always dividing something into what something is and what something isn't. So I think that's like if I'm making a game where the theme is, I think division is sort of the key thing. So a question about like game mechanics or concepts. I think there's sort of I would talk about an interesting like of drawing borders. I think um, long, very fraught real world history and all of that, but I've just realized I'm going to be spelling borders entirely wrong this whole time, which fun times. Um, borders. Yes, it's got an A in it. Great. Lovely. Spending time on that. This is sometimes being both poor spelling and also cannot stand not spelling things correctly is challenging. So drawing borders I think is potentially interesting game mechanic. Then um, it could be a very sort of interesting. The players are you're drawing borders on a map in some way for some purpose. So that could be kind of an interesting um, you know mechanic, right? Of you're trying to draw borders that are advantageous for you, that encapsulate the right resources or territory. Um, stuff. Let's see here. So this also, I'm just thinking of So like drawing, I don't know, I think sort of genre of game, but like negotiation. It feels like potentially there's something interesting with maybe this might be maybe a board game, maybe a video game, but the players having to draw borders in some maybe you're in some sort of negotiation, and the goal is to draw borders advantageous for you, or your side, which I think immediately becomes sort of an interesting, especially a physical game. It kind of gives like that very physical feeling of drawing borders. I think is I always love board games that have that very nice satisfying physical feel to them. So that's direction that's um, very very interesting. So I think about this like this negotiation game idea a little bit more. Um, so obviously, right, like the end goal is to right. I feel like the end state of the game, sort of starting to just think through my ideas and think through like the how this game might play out and kind of think back um, backwards. Start in maybe a different color here. Start in red, just to differentiate this. Um, what was my thought? Oh yeah, so thinking backwards. Right, the end state of this game, right? The game ends when like you're able to draw. The game ends with like the completed border drawn. Um, uh, so I guess maybe there's players can maybe I'm thinking. So the question is, the game ends with like a border that's maybe like my question is like, does the game only end when all parties agree, or is there some sort of deadline? Probably you can't really. You're never going to have all parties agreeing in a negotiation game. So I think the game will end after maybe sort of a certain number of rounds of like where the border has been negotiated, right? Um, Game ends with completed border. So now I'm thinking about like, so not only thinking about like sort of the resources, right? We're talking about division of resources, division of land, and especially in terms of like we're drawing borders between two countries, or between maybe a group of countries, or like a group of warlords or something. We can think about the theming a little bit later, right? Um, so the goal, right? The goal for the players. Draw best draw. Oops. And to just border. So that's the goal. The goal of the players, right? Maybe they're representing something. Maybe they're representing countries. Maybe they're representing warlords or whatever. But the goal is to have to end the game with you in the most sort of advantageous way. Your borders in the advantageous way. So, I mean, thinking about this from sort of like the political lens, right? Maybe players need to spend like political capital. It could be like an actual sort of resource in the game. Um, to get things what they want. I think that's an interesting angle, makes it very capital P political. which could be very, very interesting. One thing I was also thinking about in terms of, right, we're trying to draw the most advantageous border. So of course the question is like what makes a border more or less advantageous? It's sort of like the next question that comes to mind. Good for a player. I think that then the sort of the answer to that is like, well, really, it matters like what it contains is the important thing. Is easier, right? Like that's the thing. So drawing the border. So we want to contain the most stuff that is most valuable to us. So I guess like I'm sort of thinking, kind of like maybe sort of like a sort of Settlers of Catan or like Carcassonne. That sort of like very board game board with there's different maybe tiles or areas or resources, and you want to encapsulate the most amount of resources in in your like continuous border. So like I'm thinking, right? So like this is feeling more and more. This idea is more board gamey than maybe digital than video game, but you can see, right? So I'm thinking, we've got. Now I'm gonna have to expose my poor drawing skills, right? Right. Maybe we've got like it's a map, and there's like this river. Maybe there's a big lake over here, and you've got like big old mountains or whatever. And or maybe mountains is not the thing, but like there's like gold, right? There's like gold in the mountains, oops, or mines or something, right? And then the players, right? And then maybe there's like wheat, wheat next to the river or whatever, right? Wheat fields, some sort of resources like that. Maybe there's, forest and trees someplace else. And then we're trying to like the players are drawing these borders here in red that divide the map in some ways of like so you control the different resources, and maybe there's like also like cities and that are important in that sort of thing. And then I was thinking, so now I'm thinking like classic some classic like victory point sort of type conditions of VPs for like the things that you've got in your resources territory cities, etc. So okay, I'm liking the sound of this board game, a little bit, right? It's sort of negotiation, deal making, who can make the potentially the best deal. So I guess the question is that how exactly do these borders get drawn? What do players have to expend resources to draw these borders? Players have to expend those resources. One thing I think that to really make this sort of sort of negotiation game really work, a very key thing, right, is that different resources have different values to different players. That's always a very important thing, right? We can't, if all the resources matter equally, you can't, there needs to be a reason like why I, trade your sheep for wheat, right? Like sort of thinking about Catan, um, right? If sheep and wheat are exactly the same or exactly the same value, like, we're not, there's nothing to negotiate over, right? So that could be kind of an interesting sort of hidden information um, info of, maybe it's sort of like a sort of secret role, or the value of these different things fluctuate in sort of different in different ways. Let's see here. The question is, I want to keep drilling down on this idea, which I do like. I like quite a bit. I think this has the makings for a game. I think is kind of interesting. Or do I do some other? I guess like right. We're talking about this like this sort of drawing physical borders on a map. I guess now let's go back to a little bit more of our higher end things. I kind of want to think what is. So we're talking. This is like very much a very literal interpretation of borders, right? Borders on a map, borders between countries, or nation states or whatever. Maybe I want to think of trying to think of a game or a concept, at least for a little bit, that's a little bit less of a literal interpretation. Um, of a border, and maybe I'm getting borders and oh my god, spelling is horrible and this is very embarrassing, but borders and borders, very different. Right, A instead of BOR. I was correct the first time and I just doubted myself. Very, maybe it's a good thing that no one will probably see this. But, right, so borders, very, so we talk about sort of like the political border of, geographical. Um, so maybe just like more, very sort of literal, maybe the first thing you think of. So now I'm sort of thinking, what are non-literal? Interpretations of borders. So borders just being next to something. Right? It borders it. An edge. Borders. I think I'm thinking. I don't know why sort of this association with like books is coming to, and maybe like the bookstore borders, but this is sort of a free association that we get to be doing here. It's like the book borders, like in the borders of the pages or something. Um, borders. Thinking. Borders. Borders. I'm thinking of others. I mean, I'm kind of. This is sometimes something happens that, with game design, I find myself in the stuck. I'm kind of fixated on the idea of interpreting borders as these, political boundaries. I think there's maybe something kind of interesting. Border something. I'm thinking maybe sort of art books, sort of more art of the border, something around something, the borders of a painting, the borders of like a greeting card that you might then write in. I think that could be kind of an interesting sort of, I guess like the game that's really coming to mind is like sort of like a little to the left of matching borders on cards, lining up borders, um, and like patterns. I don't know how that's sort of a different take on a little from the left or a little to the left. But yeah, I'm sort of thinking of the border stuff around it. I think something on the border, something on the edges. I think I'm kind of now. I'm sort of thinking sort of as like a visual sort of puzzly game. That the puzzle is contained in like the borders of something. So maybe the borders. Maybe like you're going, and sort of borders of like greeting cards, of like postcards. Um, maybe you're trying to puzzle something together from all of them, or maybe maybe going back to sort of like a little bit of like sort of the sort of a little from the left, that sort of vein, but also sort of in the vein of like Carcassonne and tile laying. Um, you know, maybe the way that the way that this works is you know it's kind of that sort of tile laying game of if these two squares are the tiles, right, and the goal is to like match up these it's got all this border, right, and we got to match the pattern between them, right, so that when we put these two together they line up, which is kind of an interesting. It's kind of a jigsaw puzzly, which is interesting, but I don't know, maybe as a core game mechanic, not the most compelling thing to me. But it's kind of an interesting thing. The other thing that I was thinking, like in the borders, it's more like the maybe you're trying to piece together some sort of mystery. In the borders of something, or at the borders, at the edges. It's definitely not not my finest work. I don't feel this is not really feeling the most compelling to me. So I think, let's see, I've got about we've done about halfway. It's been about 23 minutes. It looks like, looking up at my clock. I think I'm going to go back to this concept of drawing borders, right, and this sort of negotiation game that I was thinking of, right, where we're drawing, creating physical borders on a map, which I think is interesting. All right, so now I'm thinking about trying to think of my favorite sort of negotiation board games and how they do things, and how I might want to do something different. Because right, ultimately, the way that this game works, and the other question, right, like maybe to maybe change things up a little bit now that I've sitting and thinking, right? This is sort of catching myself in maybe some of my own biases and thinking patterns, right? This is the way I'm thinking about this, or the way that I sort of presented this idea, I feel, is a kind of a very colonialist, sort of this kind of like the rush for Africa, draw straight lines on the map, divide things, sort of idea. borders. Um, I was thinking, well, maybe turning this on its head, right? This is a very much like, oh, it's after a war, we're negotiating the peace element, we're negotiating where the borders go on a map, right? What if we, turn that on the head, and that it wasn't necessarily a competitive game where the goal is, we want to, where we're not like trying to draw advantageous borders for ourselves, right? Like this idea over here. And that the goal is that as players, that maybe the goal is to find like compromise or something that works well for us. And that, maybe each player represents their own different people. But the ultimate goal is to draw equitable borders. And it could also be maybe a hidden role thing where like one player isn't, their goal is not to draw equitable borders, but to maneuver borders, the borders to be drawn in a way that aren't equitable. Right. And in this case, we're not trying to draw advantageous borders, we're trying to draw like fair and good borders. I think I'm getting very thirsty. I think next time I'm gonna have to make sure I've got a for tomorrow. I'm learning. This is the first one. We got some kinks to work out. I think water will be an important thing. I didn't underestimated how much talking I would be doing, I guess. Which is funny because I set the timer for 45 minutes. It's a long time to be yapping. So I think I like this idea much better. I think this feels drawing borders, trying to make it as good as possible. That feels very. It doesn't feel like an interesting spin on it. I think trying to making it a cooperative thing where the players maybe you represent different interests and maybe you all do have sort of like different, different resources mean different things to different people. And, and all that, and we're trying to ultimately, the goal, is to get to a thing where we feel it's equitable and good. Yeah, I like this. And I think, maybe sort of adding the hidden role aspect of it, right? Like, maybe this is a game, right? Let's start a little bit more on the details rather than just the concepts, right? Like, I'm imagining, like, 4 players, right? 3 quote-unquote good guys, right? I guess they are good, I should say. They're not quote-unquote good. They just are good. 1 traitor, maybe it's a 5-player game. Numbers, these numbers don't matter, right? And so if the goal is, divide resources evenly. Hoard, or maybe. So I remember like earlier, it was just sort of a brief. Um, I was briefly talking about, right, like the game ends with the complete like drawn border, right? And the question is like, well, maybe does the game end just like at a set time, like after a certain round, or does it end when the players agree? And I think for this concept, I'm talking like, well, it's a negotiation game. You're probably not gonna. It's really, if it's a competitive game, right? Like, and having all 4 players like agree to end the game, right? That's not going to happen because ultimately someone would have to be wrong, right? Like, or 3 people would have to be wrong, and only one person would be right because ending the game could only advantage whoever's winning, right? And maybe you can change that by having like some like hidden catch up mechanics and things at the end, but that wouldn't work. But I think for this, right, players agree to end the game, right? Or maybe not agree to end the game, but they have to agree on on the final borders, and if at any point they can agree, the game will end. Right, and maybe so now, maybe not necessarily like there's multiple ways for there's like two ways for like the trader per player to win. Right, there's one way for the non-trader players to win. Right, they need to get the majority of the people at the table, or the majority of the players, I should say, right, to agree to the borders that they draw or that have been drawn, and to divide those resources evenly. And so there's two sort of ways for the traders to win. You can either, like I said, like I wrote here, my messy handwriting, right, to have the to hoard the resources to come out with like significantly better, or, and this is maybe hitting a little bit too close to the reality of the real world, is to sabotage the process just to begin with, to make it so that nobody can agree, right? To sow enough discord. Can't agree. So that, it doesn't, there is no agreement, there is no settlement, right? The game ends, or when the game ends and no one can agree, or at a certain point, agreement hasn't been reached, the traders win. And this would also be a good, I think, in terms of game. So now, like, I'm trying to I've got a lot of ideas in my head that I need to express both verbally and on the page here. So I'm thinking kind of that, like, right, there's going to be some sort of set number of rounds, maybe negotiation rounds, or some rounds where like players can do some sort of like whatever, like sort of the main, like maybe it's like a resource game, maybe it's a card game or something similar, right? This is where they can gather or spend or whatever their resources. And then, or maybe it's just purely negotiation, right? So, talk about this box, right? We got, play. And then here is like some sort of, or maybe, it maybe this always culminates up to maybe, right, this phase, right, where we're going to draw. Right, we're going to draw the borders on like the temporary or the proposed border, propose a border, right? Border, and then then we'll have an opportunity to agree. It's like, oh, do we like all these borders? Let's end the game. Or maybe we don't like all these borders, and we and then it continues, right? Play, draw the lines, play again, or do the the round thing, and then at some point, in the future, there's like a hard limit of the game ends here, right? This is kind of like the ticking clock. We only have so long to figure out, what the most equitable or the equitable thing is, right? Don't know why that was getting erased, but it was. Right? And this is like the game end, right? Game end. And it's like maybe there's like one last chance to agree on the borders. Otherwise, the trader wins, right? I guess then, well, it's like if they agree, then we check like how equitable were the resources, right? Agree, check, not, right? Trader win, and sort of, right? And so now I'm thinking, right? There's a gameplay. Sorry, obviously for the the goal and sort of the gameplay, or the goal of whatever this gameplay ends up being, for the trader is very obvious, right? Trader goal, right? The trader gameplay is right, either like steer negotiations, So that either you get all the resources or you get lots of the resources. Or, you know, sow enough discord. Oops. So that, we can't agree. Yeah, right. That's the So that's the thing. So then, for our non-traders, oops, I wanted white, not my normal pen, not the red pen. Right. So now, right. Divide equally. Divide things equally and figure out who the trader is. Right now, I'm sort of thinking about a lot of how these sort of hidden role games type games go, and the way that So now I'm thinking like maybe, and also sort of like what are the mechanics for like how did we at the end of the game, right? Like we're saying like, okay, the borders need to be drawn in such a way that all the people are happy, or we divided the resources, and maybe dividing things equally isn't the good metric or good framework of thinking about it. Maybe each player has different goals or different things that they want, and if all the good players have their goals met, um, then that's the thing, right? Because then we can start then there's like maybe like room to interpret people's things of like, oh, my goal is to um, get X amount of gold or X amount of whatever, right? Or to have these things within my borders, right? That can create conflict. That can also give the opportunity for people to be suspicious of one another, or suspicious of their goals. Um, okay, yeah, I like that. So maybe they've got each hidden goals and goals that they need to talk about and they need to accomplish, but that can't ever be known for certain, um, right? Right, and so like the win condition for the trader is they like achieve whatever their goal was, and the rest of the players don't all complete their goal. Um, and the traders win when all three or X or however many of the non-trader players can like complete the at the end of the game when the borders are drawn, complete their goals. Okay, I like that. I think this is I think from in terms of like the top level goals of this game, I think makes a lot of sense to me. I think I understand sort of some of the play experience, right? Like, so this is in terms of like the emotional experience. I've been really thinking about talking about the mechanics, and sort of the themes of the game, but what's like the emotional goal of the game, right? So the emotional, I mean, you kind of get that little paranoia, but of sort of that social deduction, thinking about who to trust, being a little bit on edge, but also trying to like that feeling of working even though it's difficult, and there might be people who are trying to sabotage you, like working towards the working towards a good aim, like cooperation. Cooperation, maybe a little bit of a unease, maybe less the better than like paranoia. Cooperation. Unease, cooperation. I guess like kind of like excitement or that thrill of like deception. I think those are maybe some good sort of emotional. I'll have to think a little bit about it, and some of it might. Sometimes I like to design the system, make a prototype, play test, and then see kind of what people are feeling and kind of go off of that. It's a little bit, especially for when I haven't like thought about like the emotional goals from the very beginning, like I didn't do today, which maybe is a good exercise to do potentially tomorrow. All right, so we got about 5 minutes left. So the other idea I had is that maybe, right, going back to this diagram that was sort of the general structure of the game. I'm thinking like, what if, right, we're not sort of these rounds, and that these rounds are maybe just sort of like negotiation, but we're only negotiating like for each of maybe let's say we've got how do I articulate this thought? That's what I'm thinking about at the moment, right? So in each one of these rounds, it's just sort of negotiation where like maybe we each take turns to to draw proposed borders, and we like they vote or whatever. It's just discussion and drawing and voting, and that's it, right? Like it's not there isn't like resources to. I mean, there's resources in terms of what's on the map and whatnot, but there's not like you don't like gain gold or gain whatever to spend it, and there's no cards or whatever. Like each of these like rounds of play is just sort of the main gameplay act is each player would like draw their proposed borders, and maybe there's like it could be multiple rounds of revision or whatever within one of these things, and then we vote on it. But instead of doing like the entire map, right? Like we're not going to vote on the entire map, the borders of the entire map. So we're going to like maybe the map is sort of designed. I would have to think about exactly how to do this visually, but right instead of it, vote on one part of the border. Each round, right? So over time, like over the rounds of the game, we'll create right. So like at the end of each one of these rounds, like we have to move forward with like a border that was proposed or drawn or voted on or however it works in one of these rounds, right? And then the next bit of the section of the border gets drawn based off of that, right? So on and so on until the entire map is done, and that's the end of the game. And then at the end of the game, then like there's a vote, right? At the end of the game, there's a vote like, do we agree and ratify this border that you've made up out of all of these, um, the game. Um, and that's the thing. And that's like the point where if no agreement can be met because there's not enough trust, the trader wins. But if there is an agreement, there is an agreement, right? So now this is now maybe this is a little bit too in the weeds for this, but I've only got a minute left. Right now I'm thinking about it. It's like if we get to the end of the game, right? Like you will always know what team you're on. So if a hung vote, if a vote that doesn't, if it splits 2-2 or no one can agree, right? If the traitor always wins in that scenario, then it basically forces the players to agree and hope it does it. So maybe there's kind of a balancing of a non-traitor player can still win if like they've achieved their goals, but not like it can't be like the overall best victory, if unless all things are achieved. So maybe there's a little bit of at the end of the game. No, I don't. Now I've kind of talked myself into a way of not understanding. But I like this, right? We got sections, borders, and my 45 minutes are done. So I'm just going to leave it here for now. I think it was a good exercise, good, I liked it. I think I guess I'd just do a little bit of, since I'm inventing this up as I go, I think doing a nice little summary at the end, wrap up my thoughts. So, it was kind of like the first bigger idea that I latched onto, this like idea of drawing borders, the political borders. I thought ended up being the most compelling. Didn't really come up with any good ideas for sort of a less like political, literal interpretation of the theme, which is okay. But I think I like this idea. I think I like the progression that I was able to come from this, original idea of drawing borders on a map, which I felt ended up sort of being very colonialist, very standard, to this, more negotiation, cooperation, hidden role type thing. I think is potentially interesting. Like I was definitely starting in my head at the very end of thinking of all the the pitfalls and things that might come up as I move forward on this, or if I were to move forward on this. But I think like as a high level, this is sort of the concept I'm interested in, and maybe I'll end up I'll definitely end up thinking more about it, and maybe after GDC, maybe this is a game that I think as a board game I think could be a cool project to work on and flesh out more. So anyway, if you somehow have watched all the way to the end of this rambling, thank you very much. If you, I guess I'm going to be uploading this to YouTube, and like I said, that's how you're seeing it. Whoever is nebulous person who is listening to this. If you want to suggest a theme, definitely go down and put it in the comments. I will potentially do it, or any thoughts, opinions, feelings, whatever. Let me know. All right, thank you much. I will see everyone tomorrow, I guess.